I now have the privilege of introducing this year's luminary, Ric Clark. Ric is the Senior Managing Partner and Chairman of the Brookfield Property Group and Brookfield Property Partners, and the CEO of Brookfield Properties. He has been with Brookfield since 1984. They are one of the largest property owners in the world, with a global footprint that extends across the Americas, Europe, and Asia, and with investments in office, multifamily, retail, industrial, and hotel sectors. They cover the full gamut. Ric will be interviewed today by Mark Gibson, a founding partner and current CEO of HFF, one of the nation's largest and most successful commercial real estate intermediaries. Mark has been with HFF or its predecessors since 1984. Interesting, they both started about the same time. And CEO since April of 2014. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Ric, we got a heavy lift after that panel. That was really good. So let's see if we can get some things going. So it's a real privilege for me to be with you here and interview you. And Ric and I had an opportunity to talk through a few of the things that he would like to highlight, and I'm going to ask some questions. Really would encourage you to get questions up per the text here, and we're going to save about 15 minutes at the end of this for the Q&A. So that would be, we really want to hear your questions as well. So, Ric, I think unlike most situations here, people want to know who you are a little bit more. So let's start on the personal side first, and why don't you tell us, where'd you grow up, and give us the early years quickly before Brookfield, and then we'll jump into Brookfield.
That's where I'm from is a question that I often stumble with. It's probably the hardest question you're going to ask me tonight, because I didn't live anywhere until I got to college, more than 2 years. Moved a lot. My father used to work for a company called Ralston Purina. His job was he sold feed to farmers. So we lived in rural communities, and basically amongst the farmers, and every couple of years we'd move to a new district, or mostly within Pennsylvania, or out to St. Louis, Missouri, when he got an assignment to work in marketing, and back in the field, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not really sure where I'm from, to be honest. I've been in New York for about 30 years, and I could sort of consider that home.
So you went from farmer to New York.
Yeah. The
reverse Green Acres thing.
Yeah. I third generation real estate guy. Both of my grandfathers were farmers, one of which realized that if he built homes on his farm, he could make more money. So he became a real estate guy, and my father, after 15-year career at Ralston Purina, became a real estate developer as well. So I had two choices. I was going to be a farmer or a real estate guy.
Yeah.
Basically.
So school. Went to school and were an accounting major. And give us an idea of how you migrated from that major to, especially from a student perspective, how did you find your way into real estate?
My first job out of school, I got out of school in 1980, and it wasn't a great climate, but I took a job with a company called Penn Central Corporation. And this was sort of a reorganized, bankrupt railroad. Some of you might remember the Penn Central Corporation. They effectively conveyed their rail assets to the government, got $2 billion in exchange, and about $1 billion of tax losses, which they earned the hard way. And the company went out and bought a bunch of properties. And so I went to work for them in sort of an internal consulting department, where my job was basically to go from business to business that they bought and give senior management at Penn Central a report on how these what they could do to improve themselves. So it's great, great education. I learned how businesses work, how organizations work. Got sort of tired of traveling all around the world, and made my way to Olympia, New York, after being transferred to New York, and worked for the Reichman family for a number of years, who at one time I think the family was considered the world's richest family at $12 billion, which probably is not even close these days, but yeah.
Still big.
Yeah, I'd take it, but
still big,
but not in the top 10.
Yeah. So you like to run? How many marathons have you done?
So I'm a little bit excessive compulsive, and I ran none until last year, and I did two. I did both London and Chicago. I was scheduled to run New York with my older daughter, but she got injured, so I used that as an excuse not to run a third one. We deferred till this year. So
That's
yeah.
Mike McNamara, how many marathons have you run then? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Just on a comparative. So let's take it from valid point. So Rick, let's move into Brookfield. So you're with Reichman, and then what happens? Because it's an interesting transition of how things moved along and developed into Brookfield, and I think it's just a fascinating story.
Yeah, it's make a couple of points. One is, given that my father became a home builder in 1980, or actually 1976, when interest rates were approaching 20%, I learned a pretty valuable lesson that real estate is a cyclical business. Same thing with Olympia, New York. The Reichman family were, prolific developers, had great, I think, foresight into, where the world was going, particularly in the office area. And basically, we're developing major projects in New York City and London, Canary Wharf, using short-term leverage, excessive leverage, and basically got caught short when the world turned upside down. So Brookfield had provided a pretty substantial loan around what was then called the World Financial Center in New York, now Brookfield Place. And use that position in that debt position in the World Financial Center to basically influence the restructuring of O&Y's U.S. holdings. And as a result, after it was a pretty long restructuring, probably 5 years, they ended up with Olympia, New York and Boston assets, and I joined Brookfield at that time with that acquisition.
So before that acquisition, what was Brookfield?
So Brookfield. It's a company that's been around for 100 years, but I think in its modern day iteration was acquired by the Peter and Edward Bronfman in the 70s, and it was I guess an eclectic investor in real estate and infrastructure assets at the time. No real strategy, I'd say. Invested in all sorts of different things. They owned. The Montreal Canadiens and the Forum, for example, and I think realized then that the economics of sports club ownership weren't so great, so they got out of that and other things. But it wasn't a big business. When I joined them, there were probably 60 of us in New York and maybe another 100 people, scattered around Canada and a couple in Brazil, and that was it.
So let's take it from 160 people total?
Yeah, maybe a couple hundred, let's say.
A couple hundred
more or
people,
less,
and what year was that?
So the reorganization occurred, let's see, mid-90s to 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty transformational then when you bought Olympia. Okay, from that point forward, give us the iteration and where has Brookfield gone from that beginning to where it is today?
Yeah, so well, today just the real estate business alone is 14,000 people. The company, Brookfield, has...
Anybody want to do a CAGR on that real quick? That's pretty big.
Brookfield has 4 businesses. They're infrastructure, renewable energy, real estate, which is the business I'm in, and a private equity business. And together it's $250 billion of assets under management. The real estate group, when I joined, was probably a couple of $1 billion of AUM, and is now $150 billion of assets, pretty much all over the world.
Give us the concentration, U.S. versus the world.
So of the $150 billion, now this is sort of rough math, I'll get a little bit wrong, but about half of it is U.S. and the rest is sort of around the world. And from a sector standpoint, I'd say 40% is office, probably a third is retail, and the rest is sort of scattered between multifamily, hospitality, self-storage, net lease, student housing, and a couple other things.
And there's an acceleration of AUM was really when you opted to go into the fund business or the club business. Yeah. So tell everybody the various forms of capital that you are investing and why you're doing it that way.
Yeah, so
And I'll morph into that, explain the public structure that you're under now and how that works.
Okay, so So originally when I joined the firm, we spent a lot of time thinking about strategy, and frankly, our complete focus was on the cyclical nature of real estate and financial markets. We really weren't thinking about the fund business at that time. We were thinking about it, developing a strategy that would work well throughout economic cycles. And so, what we did originally was effectively use our balance sheet to acquire assets or small groupings of assets that needed some kind of operational turnaround. Maybe they had a broken capital structure, bad management team, needed some leasing attention, needed to be redeveloped. So we would use our money to do that. And then once we stabilized the asset, turned it into a core asset, we'd bring in institutional investors. And the institutional investors, like doing these investments with us, made good money, but sort of noticed that we were making a lot more money on the front end. And I think as they got more comfortable with both us and also investing in real estate, they were willing to go up the risk curve and start to invest with us earlier on. They constantly say to us, look, we'd like to get involved with you earlier in the process. And so from that, we really started our fund business. And in 2001, we launched our first small private equity fund. In 2004, we launched our first real estate debt fund. We've, I think, on our fifth fund now. And in 2006 and 2007, we started to invest. We raised a couple of small opportunity funds. I think the first one was around $200 million, the next one around $300 million. So, fast forward today, we've got just a major, fund business. We've got two large global opportunity funds. The most recent one, we raised $9 billion. It's about 70% invested now. As I said, we're on, I think, our fifth debt fund. We've got several value-add multifamily funds geared to the U.S. We've recently started a Core Plus office fund. So, we've got lots of funds, but basically effectively investing in all of those things that we do, plus in direct assets on our balance sheet, is a company called Brookfield Property Partners, which is a publicly listed entity. Sort of the best ideas, everything that we do in real estate, you can get access to through investing in that public vehicle.
And what is the NAV of BVP today? What is the...
The equity market cap's roughly $20 billion.
Okay. And a differentiator in the fund business is you co-invest quite a bit. And is that done off, how does that work?
Yeah, we do as well. I mean, people often ask us what makes you different than all the others in the real estate private equity world. And I think there are probably there are many things, but there are two main things. The first is we come to investing from an operations-oriented approach. As I mentioned, we've been in the business for 100 years and started as an owner-operator. And with 14,000 people around the world, as you can imagine, from underwriting an investment, preparing a business plan for that investment, coming up with a plan to make sure it's de-risked, figuring out capital structures, et cetera, we can do in-house. And we don't have to rely on third-party people that we don't necessarily know. Often speed of execution is the difference between, I think, winning or losing in an investment. So that's sort of one differentiator, and the other is this co-investment. In any investment that we make, Brookfield is the largest investor. So, in our opportunity funds, we may have anywhere from 25 to 40% of the equity through our public vehicles as a sponsoring LP investor in those funds. So there's a tremendous alignment of interest between us and those that invest with us.
So you've bought, in the multi-housing space, you co-own or have bought Fairfield Residential. In the industrial space, you bought, if my memory serves correctly, Verde and IDI and formed in an industrial platform there. You have Brookfield Properties, the publicly traded entity on the office. So are you doing more operating platform investors? And just for the audience, there's an allocator model and an operator model, and there's a merger of the two, and through cycles, they change and merge, and things become in favor, out of favor. What do you see going forward? Do you see that model continuing, where you maintain that operator-investor model and you continue to buy more platforms, or are you pretty much done with that?
Yeah, no, look, I think, for us, it's important to really understand, I think one of the secrets to successful investing is really understanding the markets, that you're investing in, what's going on in the markets, the assets positioned within that market, what you can do to basically de-risk it or add value. And so, having operating expertise in the sectors in which we invest is important to us. We've got a very large office business, a large retail business, and as you mentioned, some years ago, we wanted to get into the industrial space, so we went out and we bought actually 3 industrial businesses, 2 in the US, Verde and IDI, and then we bought Gaisley in Europe and merged them together to give us our industrial platform. Similarly, in the student housing space, we bought a student housing business in the UK, and we're using that to sort of aggregate other student housing assets. Fairfield in the US, Len sort of mentioned it a while ago how great the apartment business is. It's amazing, and you think about when a tenant's lease expires in an office building, you are spending a substantial capital to release that building and reposition it. Apartments, you go and you paint. It's $1 a foot or something. It's kind of nothing. So we decided about 5 years ago that we wanted to get into the multifamily business, but again, we didn't have the expertise. We saw an opportunity to recapitalize Fairfield and went from 0 apartments to 50,000 basically in 5 years, and have been using that as our platform to invest in multifamily assets.
Any other platforms you're looking at now?
The most recent things, as I mentioned, student housing, self-storage, which is a fantastic business, one of the best performing sectors of all real estate. I mean, you can imagine I have one of my 9th place trophies from junior high school sitting in a storage bin. All the other crap that you accumulate. I mean, people, you rent a storage bin, you never take your stuff out. So we've got that platform. We're investing in a manufactured housing business as well.
Manufactured housing, and how is that?
So that's just sort of a new one for us, and this is another great business. Basically what you're doing is you're renting pads to people who buy mobile homes, and put them on your pad. And what we found out through our research in this sector that although the tenants sign 1-year leases, the average stay is 20 years, and it's very little capital that you have to invest. So it's a phenomenal business.
Wow, 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Brookfield Place. You took a lot of grief for that when you first
For changing the name, or?
No, just everything. Everything at the time. Yeah. You'd never lease it. It's too much concentration risk at the time from a public analyst perspective and things like that. And it's turned out to be exceptional. So give everybody the thought process and how that came to be.
Yeah, so we, I mentioned earlier in Lower Manhattan, we through the ONY acquisition, picked up the World Financial Center, and we ended up on the wrong end of the B of A Merrill Lynch merger. We had this is an 8 million square foot project with 300,000 square feet of retail, and Merrill Lynch leased literally 50% of the project, and when they merged with B of A, we were on the losing end of that trade. So here we were, faced with the lease expiration that was coming in a couple of years, and had this center that was across the street from the World Trade Center, connected above ground, and it was kind of isolated from the World Trade Center, and we didn't exactly know what to do, but we knew we had to do something. And in our planning for this, we did a lot of studying about the age cohort that's really driving the world's economy, which is more or less the millennials. And we spent a lot of time studying how they work, which is very different, I think, than those in our generation, what they want. And what we learned is that they want everything close by. They want to live near where they work, access to transportation, play nearby, and they want to go from one thing to the other immediately and at odd times of the day. So they may leave at noon for a couple of hours, go for a run.
Why was everyone laughing at that?
I once made this comment somewhere, and I called the millennials the ADD generation. It ended up in a headline. And so, like
Probably just did here, too.
yeah, no, yeah, I forgot you recorded. But so after studying all that, we decided that, look, our real business is helping employers attract, retain, and motivate employees. It's a competitive world, and it's all about people at the end of the day. So we wanted to create an environment that would help our tenants do just that. And so we spent, about $400 million upgrading the common areas and lobbies of our office buildings, but also repositioning the retail. And we created an arts and events program to animate our public spaces and just create an environment that was attractive to the millennials and the age cohort that's driving the world's economy. And it's been a tremendous success. Honestly, we didn't know how it would work out, but it's worked out very well. The project is 95% leased. The retailers are doing fantastic. You can go there a Friday night, a Saturday morning, anytime during the day, and it's packed with a lot of life and excitement. And so, from that, we've actually started to invest in places like this around the world, and we own 10 projects currently that we consider Brookfield Places. A number of them are actually called Brookfield Place. Some aren't. They're more iconic assets with iconic names, like Canary Wharf in London. We wouldn't be bold enough to change that name, or Potsdamer Platz in Berlin. I don't think Brookfield Platz would quite work. So, all of the places kind of take on a local personality. One thing that we've learned was that you can't impose what worked in New York on Berlin. It's a very different place. So this is, something that's very exciting. We're working on our 11th place in Houston, and where we're, working and planning to reposition the Allen Center, and hopefully that'll be our next Brookfield Place.
Well, let's talk about that, because Houston's an interesting market currently. What's your take there?
Yeah, so we for better or for worse, are probably the landlord with the most experience in energy sector markets. We are the dominant landlord in Calgary, in Canada, own the most office space in downtown Houston, and also Perth, Australia. So, it's a very cyclical market. I think everything's cyclical in the real estate business at the end of the day, but there's a lot of volatility in a market like Houston. And I think we navigate the market relatively well. Our strategy is always to make hay when the market is booming, lease the space up on a long-term basis, match finance it on a long-term basis, bring in financial partners, and redeploy the money. But in the case of Houston, although the office market is pretty soft right now, and every energy tenant really understands the advantage of leverage and the leverage that they have, so the deals are brutal. The residential, there's a lot of inflow of people to Houston, into other sectors, and we think the residential market long-term will be a good area to invest. We have the density to add 2,000 apartments to our project in Houston is something that we're spending a lot of time planning and thinking about.
So let's just, sense of place. So what you're creating is an environment, sense of place, mixed use, different uses coming together. There are very few people in the U.S. that do it well. You seem to have found a right formula. What is that? I know it changes by market, but when you look at a mixed use project for you, for Brookfield, what does that mean in these cities?
Yeah, it's every. And it sort of depends on where you start and what kind of density you have. But in an ideal world, places will have a mix of office space, residential space, a hotel, great retail, restaurants, and other amenities, to support the workforce. I think that's basically it. The idea is to create an energy and a vibe that attracts and retains those that are driving the world's economy.
So from a public market perception and perspective, the market is generally segmented by property type, generally. So the office, retail, multi-housing, industrial, and generally multi-property vertical companies trade differently than single verticals. How are you thinking about that from a public market perspective, because I think you're giving the market what the market wants. It's clearly been successful. But the market, the public market, the investor market is slow to change to that reality, it appears. So how are you managing that?
You know, Mark, we don't have a great answer for that today, but something we're certainly, thinking about. For sure, from the operating performance, the financial performance coming out of these assets, it's phenomenal. And it may take time for the public market investors to sort of get that. They may get it, they may not. If they don't, maybe we do something else by splitting assets up or geographies or something like that. But for now, we're very happy with these investments.
So let's talk about the market in general. How do you see the market in the U.S.? Let's stay within the U.S. And let's talk about the office market first. And what are you seeing? Let's talk about some gateway markets that you're in, D.C. and New York and others. And let's just give us a sense of velocity of trade. And we were mentioning, Lynn was talking and others about who is driving the jobs.
Yeah, it varies from place to place. I'd say for the most part in the United States, with few exceptions, we haven't seen a full recovery in the office sector yet. We've seen modest improvements. Markets like Houston energy sector markets, not so great. Other markets, improving, but not back to where they were pre-crisis. New York would be one of the exceptions and anomalies. And it's very interesting. Leading up to the presidential election, we actually had a very slow year in New York City last year. We're a bit worried about it. But once the election got behind us, and I can't actually explain why this occurred, all of a sudden things took off. We've got more activity on the office leasing side in New York City now than we have in many years. We had a situation recently in one of our properties on our next place that we're building in New York, Manhattan West, where we had 4 tenants competing for the same space in one building. And it's been a long time since we've seen that. So that market's really good. But others are sort of steady. Suburban markets are still suffering.
Are you seeing differences in pricing and absorption levels, newer buildings versus older? Are you seeing efficiency play a bigger part? Are you seeing green building products? And has the office building envelope really changed in the last 30 years? And if so, how is that being thought of from a tenant standpoint?
I mean, look, technology is in new thinking and design, operations, architecture are definitely making a difference, and tenants are preferring those buildings. But in many cases, they also are preferring to be in sort of kind of unusual or non-standard space. And I'll give you an example. We bought a building in New York City called 450 West 33rd Street, and years ago it was literally a warehouse for gimbals. It's a 1.8 million square foot building, and at one time had an ice skating rink in it, the Sky Rink. And but the thing about this building is it had 15-foot floor-to-floor slabs and the ability to put in 10 or 12-foot windows, and it really has attracted the creative types. And that building is our most popular building in Manhattan. When we bought the thing, 6 or 7 years ago, we bought it in a market where rents were probably $35 a foot. We underwrote 42. Took a lot of grief for being so bold in our underwriting, but are signing leases at $90 a foot today. So it's really phenomenal. So I'd say tenants like definitely like newer or modern or redeveloped space, but in many cases, particularly technology firms, they like this unusual retrofitted kind of space.
Have you seen a change in density?
Definitely a change in density, and definitely a change in density, and also a migration to open space planning. I mean, we as an organization have been an open plan for many years, and we're seeing more and more of that. But maybe I can tell you a little anecdotal story. One of my tenants called me up not long ago and said to me, "Rick, I'm sitting here with my architect. I'm designing my space. We're planning a boardroom that we're literally going to use once a quarter. And that's ridiculous. I wish I could put bodies in this space and make it productive space. If you guys could do something to provide flexible meeting room space for me, that would be fantastic. And so, listening, and in addition to that, a number of tenants have sort of said to us, 80% of my space is fixed and 20% is variable. It's sort of project basis I need it, and I'm tired of sort of warehousing that space for you. If you had a solution where I could rent space, maybe from a co-working operation, when I ramp up on projects, that would make me more efficient. So, I think the office landlords that are going to be the most successful are the ones that are listening to these, these comments coming from their tenants. And one of the things that we did is in response to this call that I got from the CEO, is we found this company called Convene, which initially provided, signed leases with landlords or management agreements to provide this meeting space. And so, we're now a major investor in a company called Convene that does just that, and are exploring things that we can do in the co-working space as well. So densities are definitely coming down, but it's not a bad thing for landlords, because I think through, meeting spaces and co-working spaces and those kind of things, they're filling the void.
Great. What do you make of this WeWork trade with IBM?
Look,
Explain some of that. Why would that happen?
So I don't know if I'm familiar with this exact trade you're referring to, but maybe if you tell me a little about it, I'll take an attempt to explain it.
It was just announced that they took an entire WeWorks building in New York as a staging plan to go do something else,
Yeah.
so shorter term and needed more flexibility,
Okay.
et cetera.
Yeah.
Are you seeing more of that happen?
Yeah, I mean, look, WeWork started, month to month, renting desk space to tenants, and, have started to do more and more deal with corporate users on I'm not going to say a long-term basis. It's not like they're signing 10-year leases, but, maybe year leases or 2-year leases and those kind of things. And it speaks to the point that I mentioned a moment ago. Tenants are just looking for, flexibility. Years past, they would come in and sign a 10, 15, 20-year lease for a space that they thought they needed, and a lot of it just sat there idle, and they're just trying to be more efficient. And, honestly, I think it's a healthy evolution of the market. I think the most successful landlords will figure out how to embrace this co-working trend and either start their own co-working business or venture with somebody like a WeWork or one of their competitors to provide this solution to tenants.
Do you see them as a competitor or a client?
Yeah, I don't. I see them more as a client than a competitor. Yeah.
What about trends in other property types? Are you seeing anything notable in multi-housing or retail?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're at the very tip of the technology iceberg. I mean, there's a lot happening now in the technological area, and I'll just give you a couple examples of things that we're doing. In the retail area, we've partnered with a company called Ritual, and at our Brookfield Place project in Lower Manhattan, we've got this 40,000 square foot food hall called Hudson Eats, and with 50,000 people working in the complex, you can imagine how crowded it gets at lunchtime. So Ritual, provides an app. 25% of the people that work in Brookfield Place have actually downloaded and consistently use this app. They'll punch up on their iPhone what they want for lunch. They get pinged when it's going to be ready. They come down, it's sitting right there, and their credit card has been charged for it. So it basically it is increase the sales of the retailers that are tapping into it by 25%, and definitely makes the lives of those that use it a lot easier. In the multifamily area, we've partnered with a company called Ori, O-R-I. We just built a pretty large apartment building in New York City called the Eugene. Opened up 2 months ago. It's 844 units, and we're piloting a technology that they've developed. And if you think back 20 years ago, for those of you who rented an apartment 20 years ago, where they had Murphy beds that sort of closed up into walls.
I still have one. So
I never could understand those, to be honest. But you get up in the morning, you press a button, your bed, kind of folds up into something, your bookcase moves, and all of a sudden you've got this great sort of social space within your apartment. The complexion of your apartment totally changes. So what that means is, young people starting out that are living on a budget don't really want to sacrifice space are able to take less space and have everything that, that someone else has. So, there's a lot of those kind of things happening that are really enhancing the consumer experience.
Do you actually have that in the Eugene?
We're piloting this ORI project into Eugene. So I'll come back next year and tell you how it goes.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. Matt, how are we doing on questions?
So we've got two. One of them is mine, but
this isn't more. I mean, the texting.
Hey, okay, so the one that's not mine. So Rick, you own. Your company owns a ton of buildings around the world. So if you had to pick one asset that you love, what asset is that and why?
I think my personal favorite is this one that I mentioned, this office asset in New York, 450 West 33rd Street, which has been rebranded 5 Manhattan West. This old warehouse that we converted into great creative space, and it's doing phenomenally well. We've made a ton of money on it. This was a great situation where maybe one thing I could say to people here is that. Oftentimes you sort of look at a spreadsheet when you're looking at an acquisition and the numbers say don't do the deal, but it's really important to understand where you are in the cycle, but also what's going on in the area where an asset is located. And this one has been phenomenal. We competed like many others to try to buy the debt on the property. The thought was that the owner was going to end up being foreclosed on. We lost out, someone else bought it. I called up the owner and actually told him I thought his money was in the equity. He was in the money. We paid him a modest amount of money for his equity and took the asset. And everybody thought we overpaid, but it's been phenomenal. So I'm a bit passionate about this one, but there are many others as well.
So the Steer Center spent a fair amount of time in India recently, and we've gone over there and done a lot of our sort of site visits and so forth, and understood sort of the infrastructure issues that they have there, as well as the general real estate issues. And when you think about the public model, the REIT model, and the impact that could have on developing a country, and the values that can provide to the individual, the Indians on a day-to-day basis. You guys and Blackstone are routinely noted as the first movers likely in that space over there. So can you give any insight into what your views are on that market? Is there a public exit in 2017? Or what are your thoughts on just sort of where that's likely to go?
Well, I'd say a couple of things about India. When the last global financial crisis hit, a lot of the private equity real estate money went to Europe and left developing markets like Brazil and India. And we're a pretty contrarian investor. We look for opportunities where there are capital voids. I mean, you can't argue with the demographics of India. So we went in when everybody else was leaving, and we bought an office business there, and we're in the process of buying our second office business there. And there's tremendous synergies between our tenants in the United States and other parts of the world and India. Many of them have back offices there, and the people that are responsible for real estate decisions are the people that are sitting, in the markets in which we work. So, we've done very well on the leasing front just by those relationships, and I think performance has been great. India as a market has performed well. There's GDP growth right now. Interest rates are kind of at a historical low for the last 6 years, and a number of the private Indian owners are actually thinking a lot about exit, and some of them are thinking about a REIT exit, as a way to sort of monetize their assets there. So, look, we like it as a market long term. We aren't planning to take our assets public in the current year, but I think you will see a lot of REITs spring up in India.
And just one more point on that. Is there a reason, whether it be something from a legal perspective, why you don't think it's the right time? They went through a demonetization recently. What's sort of holding that process up?
Well, I think for us, for us, the reason why we're not exiting is we don't think we've fully maximized the value of the assets. So there's some more leasing that needs to be done. The company that we acquired had some developments that were in the works that needed to be completed and leased up, so we're concluding that stuff as well.
So we have another question here. Can you talk a bit about the large suburban office buy from Wash Reed in DC last year?
Yeah, so that portfolio was bought by our Opportunity Fund, and I think in a number of like for us, it was just a pure opportunistic play. We felt that we can put our local management team behind. There's a meaningful amount of vacancy in that portfolio, and it's basically a turnaround play for us.
Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on e-commerce and Amazon and the effect on the retail real estate market?
Yeah, so look, Amazon is a huge powerhouse in the retail business for sure. We were talking earlier, I think they accounted for 40 or 50% of the industrial leasing that was done in Europe last year. They've been expanding in the office side around the world. It's really incredible. There's a lot of talk about how Amazon and other e-commerce can impact malls, and there's sort of mixed thoughts on that. If you talk to a number of those involved in managing the major mall companies, they seem to not be worried about it. Maybe they're speaking their own book, I don't know, but I think the best malls will always do pretty well. A lot of the B malls, I think, which are facing more competition from e-commerce are to make those successful, there's a redevelopment play going on where those malls are actually being demalled and turned into grocery-anchored community centers or more sort of lifestyle community-focused centers. So anyway, for sure the internet and e-commerce is having an impact on retail, but I think e-commerce works with physical real estate. There's stats about for every 5 things you buy on the internet, 4, I'll get these stats a little bit wrong, 4 are returned in the store, and while someone's in the store, they spend more money. So I think there's some synergies, but we'll see.
So Invitation Homes went public a couple months ago. I was very fortunate with the basis I was able to get in at when it went public. But can you talk about that model a little bit? Any thoughts on just that? If you read Green Street, they're very bullish on it. It's seen strong growth from a revenue perspective.
So this is aggregating single-family homes,
right?
Yeah. So we didn't invest in that business, and I think for us we spent a lot of time studying the demographics around the reurbanization of cities, and I'll just share a couple of stats with you. And again, I'll get them a little bit wrong, but in 1950, I think there were 725 million people living in cities, so 29% of the world's population lived in urban areas. By 2014, that number grew to 3.9. So both the world's population grew, but there's a major migration into cities, and that became 50% of the world's population lived in cities. Many experts think by 2042, that number will grow to 6 billion. And almost 70% of the world's population will live in cities. So for us, a number of these homes are in suburban areas or wherever, certainly not in cities. We've chosen to invest and grow an urban multifamily business. We frankly were a bit worried about exit. Sounds like you did very well. We weren't sure that a public company exit would work, and we didn't want to sell off single-family homes, in bulk, one at a time.
So the last one here is, can you talk about the most exciting part of your responsibilities at Brookfield?
For me, every day is different. We've got a pretty large organization, and there's not a lot of routine in my day. I think the most exciting part for me is participating in deals. Trying to find the next thing like 450 West 33rd Street where we think we can put our platform behind to create value. And for me, that's the most exciting.
How many miles do you log every year?
Yeah, I don't know. I've got several million miles in a number of airlines. I've yet to have a pilot sit beside me and give me a card, though. That hasn't happened.
So you mentioned something about India and tenancy and the Brookfield brand. There's been such a debate in the office space about whether brand makes a difference or it doesn't. Do tenants really like having singular landlords around the world or around the United States? Do you see a premium for that?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I mean, I can tell you when we first put our name on a Brookfield place, the first one we did was Toronto, and there was a lot of internal debate about whether we should do this or not. Our leasing teams did not want to do it. They thought the market would react negatively to it, but I can tell you the properties with our brand on them are the most successful that we own. They're probably the highest quality. They have this mixed use place component that I talked about before, so maybe that's the reason why. But I've had a number of tenants. Just another anecdote. Just a real estate. Somebody ran a real estate business. Part of a major insurance company called me up one day and said, "If you guys are in India, I'll rent 500,000 feet from you because I never want to go there. And I know I can call you and I can yell at you and you'll fix that problem." So not trying to disparage any country or market, but I think for tenants that know that they...
What did you say? No, I don't think I want to.
Yeah, I said, sure.
Yeah.
I'll send you a lease. But, I think, these real estate departments of major organizations are understaffed, overworked, and they'd like nothing more than, to work with a professional outfit that they know will take care of them. So, it's worked out well for us. I think...
From an economic standpoint, where do you see things for the next 2 to 3 years? What is Brookfield's position on the U.S. economy?
Yeah, the U.S. economy, I think we're positive on. There's a lot of positive things. Interest rates, although migrating slowly to a more normalized level, are still very low and very accretive. There's a ton of liquidity. So anytime you want to take capital out of something, it's not that hard to do, particularly for well-located, high-quality assets. There's job growth here. So we're bullish on the U.S. economy overall. Of course, there's a lot of confusion about coming out of Washington and what may happen with the new tax plan. And one of the things that we're worried about, you talked about it a little bit in the prior panel, is will tax legislation be implemented, and what will the impact be? In the 1980s, they tried this, and it was a disaster, for the economy for a period of time. So, the unintended consequences of a tax plan are something to sort of keep an eye on. And public to private, you've done several lately. You did a large multi-housing play with Home, and you've done several of these taking public. Do you see that as a continuing part of the business, or were those more tactical plays that you just saw opportunity to more efficiently run? What is guiding you? Yeah, I think so. Some of the public to privates that we've done, I think in all cases, there's an economic reason why to do it. There's a disconnect between the screen price of the security and the underlying net asset value of the stock. In the case of one take private that we did not long ago, Associated Estates, here was a multifamily business that had high quality assets, but because of our investment in the Fairfield platform, we saw the ability to cut about $25 million a year out of the overhead. It had a pretty sizable overhead and public company expense in relation to the size of the overall company. So, we were able to sort of eliminate overhead and make it a very, profitable investment for us. So usually there's an economic case behind it. In some cases, when we're looking to build a platform or operating expertise in a business, in a sector that we're not currently in, we may do a take private under those circumstances as well.
Okay. So your clients, capital clients behind the scenes, not tenants, what is their view of the U.S. and real estate going forward? So when you've just raised a very nice fund, you're 70% into it, you're back out in the market raising a new core fund. and have closed and continuing to raise. What is the attitude of investors?
So investors look, I'd say the most interesting market to most of our international institutional investors is the United States. Most of them want to be here. I think about 29% of the institutional investors have 10% of their book dedicated to assets, and a lot of that skewed towards the United States, and that number is expected to grow, over time. So, I think it varies from investor to investor where they're playing in the risk spectrum. Some are like opportunistic, some like core, some like both.
But you're seeing no lack of liquidity?
No lack of liquidity, no.
And are you seeing an aversion to investing to go to cash, or are you seeing more risk on versus risk off?
I think in the U.S. risk off more, but there's plenty of interest across the spectrum. Actually, we're seeing. I say risk off only because I hear over and over again how hard it is to get opportunistic deals done in the United States. We've done plenty. We've been very active, but I think if there's any aversion to dedicating money to the opportunistic sector, it's just out of concern for opportunities.
Okay. We're almost out of time. Any other questions that we can take?
So what's it like competing against John Gray?
Look, I think Blackstone's a great organization. We're friends. They are the one group that I'd say that we run into around the world consistently, perhaps the only one. But we sometimes sell them things, sometimes buy things from them, sometimes do deals together. So they're a great outfit.
If you thought across the globe, across sectors, and you had to just pick one place and one sector to invest in the next 6 months, what would it be?
One?
So obviously your best one. Where do you see the best opportunity?
You're going to have to think for a minute on that. Look, I think one area that I've been very focused on and interested in is multifamily business in Europe and particularly the UK. And when it comes to multifamily businesses in the United States, they're very developed. But when you go to the UK, you're not going to find a big multifamily business. What happens there is people build condominiums, and someone may buy 1, 2, or 3 in a building, and they aggregate condos in a lot of buildings and basically start a rental business that way. So we're doing a lot at Canary Wharf. The next phase of development there is Wood Wharf. It's 11 million square feet of density, half of which is dedicated to multifamily. So I think I'd probably be more excited about that than anything.
Great. So last question, because I loved your last one. If you had to give advice to anyone, what advice do you wish someone would have given you when you were graduating college, looking back on it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think for me, probably like most people when they start out, you try to do everything on your own and figure everything out on your own. And I've learned in my career by accident that mentors are a very important thing in developing your career. So I would say to everybody, don't be afraid to ask for advice. Look for people that you could sort of get close to, that can mentor you and help you throughout your career. I've had a couple that are phenomenal, and it's been really helpful to me.
That's great. Okay, let's give a round of applause.
All right, everybody, we can quickly wrap up here, but I wanted to thank again our panelists, Mark and Rick. Great job. Thank you again. Jeff, Len and Dennis, thank you guys very much. The panel was great. Thank you very much, most importantly, to HFF. Mark, I appreciate it very much. Sponsorship here and your friendship is very important. I want to thank Steve Conley, who's an excellent friend of the program and really got all of this done for us on the HFF side. So thank you very much to them. CREFC, as well as which is a supporting sponsor. So I would like to invite everybody to go up 2 floors. I believe there's some drinks. There might even be a band up there. So please go up, have fun, come back next year, tell your friends, hire our students. Have a good night.